simple. This is a slide about me. Essentially just, I've gotten to work on a lot of cool projects with a lot of great people. Feel free to ask me about any of them if you're interested. So, mainly we're here to talk about troubleshooting today. Okay, troubleshooting is a very fun topic in my opinion. It's one of my favorite things to kind of train on and to talk about. You know, it can be a complicated subject to talk about, but for the most part, there are a few ways that you can kind of simplify, especially in SharePoint, a very complex system down to certain concepts. So we're going to talk about first, you know, why is it important to talk about troubleshooting? We're going to touch on some troubleshooting methodologies. We're going to talk about troubleshooting SharePoint specifically and some of the things that are involved in that. And then I've got a few tips and things like that that I can share with you as well. So first, why talk about troubleshooting in SharePoint, right? SharePoint's easy, right? There's nothing to it. You got a browser, a web server, and a database, right? No big deal, right? We've got IE, we've got our web server, we've got our database. It's a piece of cake, okay? Right? Session's over. Right. Well, you know, I mean, SharePoint does all have all those application servers stuck in there, you know, and a lot of times people are using Firefox or they're using Chrome. You know, sometimes you've got a load balancer here that can make things complicated because then you've got two web front ends, right? Two app servers you got to deal with. Your SQL's usually clustered or mirrored or something. You've got a shared database. You know, that makes it a little bit more complicated. Oh, you know what? We've got some federated services here with Azure. We're doing some hybrid stuff, right? We've got our federation servers. That makes it a little bit more complicated as too, so those are all included. Yeah, you know what? Also, we're doing some custom solutions. So really, we've got a dev environment, right? We've got a test environment. So we've got to maintain those, keep those synced up. You know, and of course, developers, they're just out there putting all sorts of crazy stuff in there. You know, we've got the kitchen sink, you know, that they're throwing in with their code. Okay. We've got DR. Don't forget about that. Might have to troubleshoot that. Okay. You know, what else? We've got our security requirements. I forgot, you know. They're trying to wrap the whole thing in bubble wrap, so that complicates things just a little bit. Right? We've got business requirements. We've got all sorts of different teams that we're trying to coordinate with because, you know what? Actually, in this particular environment, we're in a federal, we're in enterprise. The database servers are completely controlled by a different team, different contracting company. We've got to fill out forms in triplicate before they'll even let us see something in that environment, right? Zara's familiar with that. You can't even look at that server. Okay? So that complicates issues, all right? Not looking so simple anymore, right? It's starting to get more complicated. SharePoint is a very complicated system, all right? In fact, it's a system of systems. Right? It's not just one thing. It's many things working in tandem to accomplish a single result. The other reason I like to talk about troubleshooting, and I'm actually going to jump ahead. I didn't expect to have a whiteboard, so you'll see my very lovely transitional slides here that I worked on because I wasn't sure that I'd have a whiteboard to play with. So the other thing that you hear about with troubleshooting is that people talk about troubleshooting like it's some kind of innate ability, you know? Like some people are just born troubleshooters, okay? Matt and I were talking about this before the session. We were talking about, you know, he was like, oh yeah, you know, your troubleshooting isn't really an art, you know, it's one of those things where you're just like, okay, you know, maybe it's this way, but it's not really like that. Troubleshooting is actually a science. It's a series of repeatable steps, okay, that can be applied to any system, all right, or any problem, all right, to reach a resolution, okay? Now, we are actually born troubleshooters, but all of us are born troubleshooters, all right? You think about babies and the way they interact with the world. Parents, yeah, okay, so, you know, the baby doesn't throw the cup on the ground once, all right? No, they throw it on the ground, they watch you pick it up, they throw it on the ground, they watch you pick it up, they verify information constantly. That's how they interact with the world. That's how they understand the world, okay? Troubleshooting is very similar, all right, in the sense that you're looking for repeatable repeatable effects to a problem. You're looking to recreate the issue. You're looking to try and find something that brings it together and has it all make sense. So what is it that makes for a good troubleshooter? Okay? These are some of the items, in my opinion, all right, that make for good troubleshooting skills. Okay? First is a methodology. I say a working methodology because a lot of people I talk to have different approaches to troubleshooting, and that's okay. All right? The idea is that it's something that works for you, it's repeatable, okay, and it gets you results. Now, I'm going to propose a methodology that I've had a lot of experience with and a lot of success with, but it isn't necessarily something that you have to do word for word in order to learn how to troubleshoot, especially in SharePoint. Okay? Patience and persistence. Okay? I worked on a project once. We had a guy who was well, he was more of a database developer, but he did some database administration as well. And he ran into a problem with some custom databases, and he worked on it Thursday, and he worked on it Friday, and he worked on it Saturday, and it's Saturday night, midnight, he left his badge on his desk and walked out the door. Okay? He might have been an awesome troubleshooter. It might have been just that one problem that broke him, but he could have been very, very close to fixing the problem too. He could have been almost there. All right, so you definitely have to have patience. You have to stay calm. All right, everybody's seeing this, so I thought I'd throw it in there too, because I want to be just like everybody else. So you have to stay calm. You have to stay persistent. All right, good communication skills are important. Okay. You need to be able to communicate with other people on the team. You need to be able to ask the right questions. All right. You need to be able to communicate issues to the customers. All right. I haven't always worked in computers. Well, I've always worked in electronics of some sort. All right, but computers and software. Most recently, I used to work for a company that made medical imaging equipment. Okay. They had these big dark rooms with these very sophisticated, very sensitive cameras. All right, that would take pictures of, well, DNA essentially, with these gels, and they take pictures of it. So these cameras were super sensitive. They used to put them on satellites. All right, that's how incredibly sensitive they were. We had this one problem where all of the dark images were getting little spots, little white spots. Okay, and we looked at software correction. We looked at interference. We looked at EMI. We looked at everything that we possibly could. We finally got the manufacturer on the phone, and they said, "Oh, yeah, those are cosmic rays." What are cosmic rays? Okay. So the tech on the phone, he's like, "Well, 100 million years ago, a star exploded." All right. It exploded, and it sent out all these charged particles through space. They're hitting the atmosphere constantly. There's nothing you can do about it. All right. Wrap the building in lead, essentially. So good communication skills. I had to call the customer. All right. Tell the customer, yeah, unfortunately, those are cosmic rays. Customer's like, what are cosmic rays? 100 million years ago, a star exploded. But, okay, so and then finally experience. Now I put experience here at the end just because I want to talk a little bit about experience in general. Some people might consider this to be the most important thing when it comes to troubleshooting, and it is very important, but there's only one way to get experience, and that's by actually doing it, right? So what does experience help you with? First of all, experience helps you learn what the expected outcomes are, okay? It helps you learn the system operation as a whole, okay? It also kind of teaches you that everything is broken already, okay? So you kind of lose that fear of how am I going to break this by trying to troubleshoot, because you realize that computers are not as ordered and as perfect as everybody would like them to think. I mean, being the IT guy in the family, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. People in your family bring you everything. They bring you the speak and spell. My daughter used to bring me dead bugs, thinking that I would be able to fix them. Okay, but all of these things just kind of work haphazardly and are held together very kind of loosely. There's a great article I read just recently called "Everything is Broken." You should look it up if you get a chance. It was by Quinn Norton on medium.com. But, having this experience is great, but you got to get to that experience by actually getting your hands in and starting to work on the systems. Okay, so that is my introduction, and for some reason PowerPoint doesn't like to advance when I'm plugged into this projector. So, does anybody object to that? Can they see it? Okay, I'm not going to fight with PowerPoint anymore. We'll just jump to this. So let's talk about troubleshooting methodologies. Okay, how do we get started? We've got a problem. It's not an easy problem. We're not sure where to go. All right, all SharePoint's giving us is a correlation ID. We tried to Google it, but you know, correlation ID, nothing came up, of course. So where do we go from here? All right, so this is a methodology that I've used in the past. I actually borrowed it from my wife. I stole it from her, and it's called ADPIE. All right, assess, diagnose, plan, implement, and evaluate. All right, it's a nursing diagnosis. It's for treatment plans. All right, and you know it's funny. The worst thing about having a nurse as a wife, actually, since Kurt's, let me just say, since you're recording, there's nothing wrong with having a nurse for a wife. It's awesome. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. Okay. But she has no sympathy for me when I'm hurt or sick. I can walk inside with, you know, a spike coming through my shoulder, and she'll finish her phone call, look at me, and be like, "Yeah, I guess we should go to the emergency room." So assess. All right. In our assessment phase, what are we doing? We're trying to collect as much information we can about the issue. We're talking to the user who's experiencing it. All right. We're reviewing any log files that might be related to it. We're going to try and recreate the issue ourselves, okay? We're going to review configuration information related to that particular service or application, all right? We're going to Google, we're going to search for information, all right? We're going to do that, and then we might call somebody and have a conversation with them, but at least then we're armed with the details. You know, we know our configuration, we know our environment, we looked at the logs, okay? SharePoint is so different in everybody's environment. All right, everybody's on different versions, they've got different customizations, they've got different setups and configurations, that I'll get, you know, an email from somebody saying, I'm getting this problem, and there's no place to start there because you don't know what their environment looks like, you don't know what kind of stuff that they're experiencing. So we assess first, we collect information, all right? Based on that assessment, all right, we diagnose, all right? And this is where that methodology, that repeatable experimentation comes in. A diagnosis is a hypothesis about why the problem is happening, right? It's not the solution, all right? It's the cause, all right? So when we diagnose the problem, all right, we make sure that it is grounded in the information that we've collected, all right? So that blog post that we're reading about how to fix something actually applies to us. It's not based on SharePoint 2007, and we're on SharePoint 2010, all right? We document what this hypothesis is, all right? And that will allow us to actually get into planning our solution, okay? So next step is to plan, all right? Document the potential solution, all right? Investigate the appropriate way to implement the solution. You know, people talk on and off about best practices, you know, what's a best practice, what's not a best practice. There's very few things IT people like to argue about more than what is considered a best practice, all right? But if we do some research, we look at TechNet, we look at MSDN, we look at some of the people who've got the loudest voices in the industry. I don't know if that's the right way to put that, but we can kind of look and see what other people are doing, all right? We think about long-term effects, all right? So if I go in and I set this particular configuration, is it going to affect something on the system as a whole? My favorite current example of that right now is distributed cache. Somebody worked in SharePoint 2013 at the admin level and had to play with distributed cache? No? A little bit? Okay, awesome. Don't do it. It's awful. All right? It's the only place on TechNet I've ever seen where there's a warning at the top of the page saying if you configure this wrong, you will have to reinstall your entire farm. All right? So if you go in there and you're looking at your potential solution, and your potential solution, your hypothesis is, I'm going to just shut off distributed cache and go in there and stop the service, it will never work again. All right? unfortunately. All right, and then I have communicated intentions, and that is essentially, you know, it's for this scenario here where different teams are controlling different things. Are you going to do something that's going to affect the database people, or the network people, or the security people? Does your change require approval by some kind of change control board? All right. Do you have to notify the business that the system is going down, you know, or a reset or something like that? You know, I mean, I've you know, seen a lot of advice online where they'll say just IIS reset and that will fix it. Well, some environments we're not allowed to IIS reset. You know, I mean, it's considered a service interruption, so can't do it. So plan, and then I have implement. Okay, I didn't really have a lot to write here because you just do it, you know. But without the I in ADPIE, it was ADPIE, and my boss told me that that wasn't appropriate for a presentation. So, do it, implement it, and then finally, evaluation. Okay, evaluation is you ensure that the original problem has been resolved. Okay, you document your findings and your changes, and if you didn't fix the problem, all right, it's a methodology. It's a circle. We can start from the beginning. Assess. Why didn't this fix the problem? Look at the logs again. Did the problem change? Did it shift? Okay. Start over. Repeat as necessary. So I typically, for my documentation, just as a tip there, is I use OneNote a lot. All right. I used to use Excel because I liked it was very linear. I could go through all my steps and document all my changes. But stuff has gotten really fuzzy. You know, with OneNote, I can grab screenshots. I can link to websites. I can copy whole sections of notes over and kind of keep it all together. So I found actually OneNote has slowly started taking over my entire life. I'm using it for task management. I'm using it for troubleshooting. I'm using it for all of my notes lately. So it's a great tool. All right. Any questions on ADPIE before we move on? All right. Something useful you guys think that could be helpful? All right. Excellent. So the next methodology that I like to talk about is half splitting. Okay. And then we'll jump into some more SharePoint stuff. So I promise. So half splitting is a concept that I was taught in electronics troubleshooting. All right. So if you've got some electronic stuff that you're working on, right, there's usually lots of circuits, right, hundreds and hundreds of circuits. If you got a circuit fault somewhere, all right, how do you find the circuit fault? Well, one method is to systematically check every single circuit sequentially. Okay, that takes forever. Nobody wants to do that. Half splitting is a concept where you check circuit 50. All right, if 50 doesn't work, then you know that the problem is between 1 and 50, all right? So you check 25. If 25 doesn't work, you know the problem is between 1 and 25. All right, you kind of keep going down. It's a very simple concept, but how do we apply it to something like SharePoint where we've got this mess of things that we're trying to work out, all right? And I'll throw this question out there. What's the easiest way to half split a problem in a computer system? I'm sure you've all heard these words at some point. Developers love to tell me this. No? Nothing? It works on my machine. All right? And you think, yeah, that's stupid. Why are people telling me this? It's dumb. But honestly, it works on my machine is a pretty decent way to half split something. All right? Because if you think about it, right, we've got our client, we've got our load balancer, we've got our web server, we've got our app server, we've got our database, right? If it works on my machine, but not on this machine, then we know that our problem is isolated somewhere, right? Where is it isolated? If it's working, where is it isolated? It could be browser, right? All right. It could be the web server, right? It could be the load balancer, but it's probably not the database, right? Because I'm getting content. Awesome. We can eliminate something, all right? So we know it's working on my machine. So what else can we half split?
Try a different account.
Try a different account. Yes, that's awesome. So what are we half splitting there? What are we eliminating as a possibility?
Permissions.
Permissions issues. Everything in SharePoint is permissions issues. I'm telling you. All right, so like I said, very simple concept, but we're going to go through a couple of troubleshooting techniques, all right? And as we go through various components of the system later in the presentation, there'll be opportunities to half split some of those items into smaller pieces, right? So how do you eat a whale? One bite at a time, right? So absolutely, excellent. All right, so we're going to talk now about troubleshooting SharePoint. All right, and we're going to start with troubleshooting a motorcycle. Any motorcycle riders in here? People who like to ride? All right. So your motorcycle doesn't start, right? Why not? No? Do you work on your motorcycle at all?
I sold it recently, but battery would die a lot.
Battery would die out. Okay, so when you're troubleshooting an engine, all right, if it doesn't start, you have three main categories, okay? You have fuel, you have spark or electricity, and you have compression, right? If you hit the starter, right, and you hear the engine turn over, but it doesn't catch, right, compression's good. We don't have to worry about that one, all right? If you smell fuel, right, when you hit the starter, hey, I know I got gas, or you can just kind of shake it, you know, and then listen, there's gas, good here, all right? If you just have eliminated two of the items, so you're left with spark or electricity, okay? That means that we're not catching fire, so the battery's dead, all right? Or there's a loose wire, something like that. So you can take one problem, right? Engine doesn't start, and you can narrow it down to three basic categories, okay? I've thrown this out here because we're going to apply the same concept to some of our SharePoint problems. We're going to start on the client side, right? So you have your client in SharePoint IE. We're gonna ignore user errors at this point because we're gonna assume that all of our users are awesome power users and they know what they're doing, and we've never had a PEPCAC error ever in our lives, in our entire organization. You guys familiar with PEPCAC? Yeah. Yeah? Okay. All right. Why don't you share? What does PEPCAC mean?
Problem between people and share.
There you go. All right. I actually made that joke once at a client just recently, a couple weeks ago, and the person I was working with had no idea what I was talking about. It's like, man, it's pretty funny. Okay, so we have our client, right, IE, and it's trying to get something from the web server, right? And if you look at your logs, that's exactly what it says. It says get this, right? So the idea is three items. To work for that client to get something from the web server, what do we need? Connectivity, right? We need authentication and authorization. I put those together so that it would be three. Sorry, I know it's cheating. And content, okay? So, connectivity, authentication, authorization, and content. So for our web browser to have connectivity with our web server, right, what does it need? It needs a physical connection first, right? So, well, we'll say physical. It could be wireless, you know, it could be radar, it could be laser beams, whatever, okay? But it needs to actually be able to connect to that server somehow, okay? Now, what else does it need? It needs to know where that server is, right? Okay? So if you're dealing with, you know, fully qualified domain names, you're in Windows Active Directory, you need to be able to resolve the server name, okay? So, how do we troubleshoot connectivity? If we don't have connectivity, we're not going anywhere, right? Connectivity is kind of like fuel. No gas, no go. All right, so we want to make sure the client is on the network that can reach the server, it can resolve the server name, and it can reach the server on the correct port. So here's some of our assessment tools for connectivity. All right, ping. All right, ping is an old school DOS command line tool that just says, hey, are you there? And it says, yep, I'm here. Okay. Now a lot of times that's blocked by a firewall or you disable requests for pings, but it's interesting. It'll usually resolve the name, all right, or the IP address, even if ping is disabled. Okay, so if you ping SharePoint.com, you might not get a reply, but it'll say what the IP address was. Okay, so you can also use ping sometimes to check DNS and make sure that the name is actually resolving correctly. This also helps us determine, depending on the load balancing solution that we're using, what server we're actually talking to. Okay. Other tools for connectivity, all right, NS lookup. All right, and I put links here. I'm not going to go into depth in each tool, all right, but I'll share the slides and there are links. And the links are actually to how to use the tool, not just download the tool, all right? So you can use these as a reference to kind of introduce yourself to each of these tools. NS lookup will allow us to confirm the domain, what is the authorized domain server, and will allow us to do some reverse lookups on names to server IP addresses, okay? And then can the client communicate on the correct port? So this is really more applicable to servers talking to each other, because mostly IE communicates with the web server on 443 and 80, right? HTTP ports, all right? But that's not everybody's. SharePoint sometimes is an internal only website. You might be hitting SharePoint on some random port, okay? 1523 or something else, right? And that port might be blocked at the firewall. You can use a tool called Port Query to actually hit that IP address or that web address on a specific port and see if it's listening or not. Okay? It's a Microsoft tool. It's an executable. You don't have to install it. It just runs. All right. Authentication and authorization. All right. So what are we checking here? Is the user authenticated to the client application, or to the client in the application? Is the user authorized to access the application? All right, so what's the difference between authentication and authorization?
Are you who you say you are?
What's that?
Are you who you say you are?
Yeah, authentication is are you who you say you are? Right. What is authorization? Do you have permissions? Awesome, you guys are a great group. Okay, so how do we assess authentication and authorization? This one's complicated. Okay. Got a couple slides on this one. So assess authentication. All right. Look at the security audit logs in the event viewer. All right. That will tell you if the user actually has access to the system. All right. It'll say access denied. All right. When it's trying to actually make that connection. I've put a couple of links here for troubleshooting Kerberos, troubleshooting claims. Okay. And then this one is a really good one because this one goes into steps for troubleshooting claims. Right, so that you can actually look at what's happening in real time as it goes through. There's some tools, there's like KerbTray and a couple things like that that you can also use to get more information about what's happening when the user tries to authenticate. Okay. And then this is also a really good link. It's a learning roadmap for claims authentication. It's a series of videos and classes that Microsoft has put together on claims in SharePoint 2013. And understanding how they work. All right. You can also look at the ULS logs. All right. When you make that GET request to the web server, ULS logs a correlation. All right. Even if it doesn't say there's a correlation, you can't see it right up front. It's still there in the ULS log, and it will tell you what you're trying to get. It'll tell you if you're denied, and it'll tell you what you're denied on. Okay. So you can search the ULS logs for this authenticated is false, all right? Your user identity name and your claims to actually get more information about the error that you're seeing. Another kind of tip that I ran into a couple weeks ago that I've been doing for a while, I didn't realize that it wasn't a thing, but if you have like a page, right, in SharePoint, and it's got some web parts on it that are connected to libraries, and a user has access to the page but not to those libraries, what typically happens? Can't see the whole page, all right, sometimes, right? It depends on which version of the web parts you're using, things like that. But if you look at the URL, all right, it'll have the SharePoint web application name, it'll have the access denied ASPX page, and then it'll have a source equals, okay? And the source equals will actually tell you what you're getting access denied to. So if you look at that source equals and you deconstruct the URL from there, you can usually see the list GUID that the person doesn't have access to, and that'll kind of give you a hint as to why this person's getting access denied. Yes, sir?
Would that be unexpected? What level would that be in the ULS? Probably. Is that unexpected, or is that error, or?
I'm honestly not sure.
You're saying the URL.
Yeah, so in the URL, it'll show up regardless of your logging settings. I'm not sure. I know that the get is normal, all right? So even if there's no error, you'll still see a get, and that's usually what I search for. And then if I don't see what I need to underneath of that, I usually just bump to verbose for a few minutes and try it again, and then do another search and see what's showing up.
So you'll get that with the default logging?
You will at least get the authenticated and the get request with the default logging levels, yes. So, assess authorization. So what are we checking here? We're checking to see the user has permissions to SharePoint. Okay, SharePoint 2010 introduced this awesome little tool, right in the permission screen. It says check permissions. You can go in there and pop in a username. Doesn't work though if it's an AD group. So if it's an AD group, you're going to need at least read access into AD to pull up those tools to see if the user is a member of the correct AD group. There's a great article here posted, which is about troubleshooting fine-grained permissions in SharePoint. All right, SharePoint does a lot of really weird stuff with a permission level it calls limited access. Okay, so if somebody grants fine-grained permissions, okay, to a single document, a single page, etc., then SharePoint actually adds that user to the site level with limited permissions, so that it can inherit certain views or certain elements from the site level down to whatever it is that they have fine-grained permissions on. One of the things that for some reason the permission managers love to do is say, why do all these people have limited access permissions? And it goes through and wipes them out, and then suddenly everybody starts getting access denied because they aren't inheriting those site elements anymore. Also, you can look again at your ULS logs, all right, and search for the GET request, the location of the resource, or access denied. That'll give you more clues as to what's going on. And you can look at the IIS logs for the start of the GET request and the HTTP error code. Okay. So those are some of the ways that you can assess authorization. Content. All right. So, client can render their content. Content is being returned, all right? So while we're assessing content, all right, we're looking for, well, hopefully none of these, all right, but what other kind of content can really cause problems if it's not being returned correctly, all right? JavaScripts, CSS, all right, custom solution stuff coming down right up to the page. If you're not getting all of that stuff to the browser's not rendering it correctly, a lot of troubleshooting happens around that, all right? So how are we going to assess the content that's being returned, right? So a couple of things that I do when I'm assessing actual pages or actual content in the browser is I look at IE itself, all right? There's two options in IE that you can turn on and off that will allow you to kind of see if there's anything else that's affecting the system, all right? You can turn off HTTP, friendly HTTP error messages. You can also check with a different browser. Okay, I know a lot of times, especially in 2010, somebody would come in and do some awesome branding on 2010. It would just be beautiful, all right? It looked great in Chrome, and just fell completely apart when you tried to load it in IE. And I don't blame the developers for that. IE has its own unique suite of problems, but sometimes just switching browsers is enough to give you some information and some clues as to what's going on. You can also use Developer Dashboard to assess content as it comes down. All right, it will actually give you ULS correlations, database status, all sorts of great information in the Developer Dashboard that opens right on the SharePoint page. All right, I've got a good link here that goes into how to turn on and turn off the Developer Dashboard, how to kind of steps through basic usage, things like that. It's a great tool to use. You can also use the developer tools in IE. All right. Developer Dashboard and Developer Tools, the names are a little, you know, they make you think that it's just for developers, but it's not. You get a lot of information as a site admin or as a farm admin on what kind of content is being returned to the client, right? Because that's what you're trying to do. And then Fiddler Web Debugger is another great one if they'll let you install it. It will actually go through and monitor each request that's being sent to the server, all right? So and which ones are coming back, all right? So you can see, oh, if there's an image that it's looking for in the layouts folder that's not being returned, right? Fiddler will actually tell you what's not being returned. It'll tell you if for some reason you have access to the site but not to this particular resource, all right? It'll show you all that good information. Any questions on that portion of it? All right, so server to server, all right? Client seems okay. We split out those issues, all right? So now we've got communication, authorization and authentication, and content and processing between web server to app server to database server, okay? Same three concepts, all right? Same three categories that you can split SharePoint problems into. It's probably permissions because everything's permissions, but, all right, we'll look at all of them. Connectivity, authentication, content, and processing. All right, so connectivity. Can the servers communicate with each other? All right. Can the servers respond to requests correctly? All right. And communication isn't being impeded by any firewalls or weird network configurations. So, again, we can use ping. Still my favorite tool. Port query. All right, we already talked about that one a little bit. In this section of the deck, I also put in a nice link here, which is the firewall requirements for SharePoint 2013, as it steps through each ports that have to be open and how they need to be opened in order to properly communicate with SharePoint. There's a couple of really good diagrams that actually step through that. That I'll put a link to it in the slide when you download it so you can see. And then network monitor. And the link here actually goes into network monitor with the SharePoint specific parsers so that you can monitor traffic between servers that is relevant to SharePoint and see what kind of communication you're getting back and forth. Okay? Authentication and authorization. All right? Permissions. It's always permissions. Service accounts can authenticate correctly. Service accounts have the permissions they need. And then the other big one that I run into quite frequently is group policy isn't messing stuff up somehow, all right? Which it very frequently is, okay? So how do you assess this, all right? Monitor the event and the SQL logs, monitor the ULS logs, look for access denied, those same kind of things that we were talking about for client connectivity, okay? And then for on the permissions side, all right, we're looking at the service account permissions, all right? And we're also looking at group policy settings, all right? So we've got some resources here for checking our service account permissions. This one actually gets you a list of permissions for all of the accounts, the SQL Server accounts, and the Windows system. So this is a good link to keep in your toolbox somewhere. It'll tell you what permissions the accounts need on the local file system and which registry keys, all right? Which ties into the next one, group policy, is if you run the SharePoint setup and the install and it says, hey, everything's cool, and then something's not working because it was supposed to change a registry setting, but your IT team has decided that that particular registry setting isn't allowed to be changed automatically by a tool. And they've got a policy that is pushing down from the top saying nothing can be changed, all right, so that's where you can run into problems. You're going to look at that stuff using a tool called ROSP, a resultant set of privilege, or a resultant set of policies, I think is what they're calling it now. This is a tool, it's part of the management interface in Windows Server. All right, you can plug in to Windows Server, you can take a look, and it will spit out all of the policies that are being applied to the server you're on, the machine you're on, the user you're logged in with. It'll tell you if you don't have login as a service rights. It'll tell you if you don't have login as a batch rights. It'll tell you if you can't do RPC calls. All right, all things that SharePoint needs to do. All right, and all things that IT guys love to turn off. All right, especially if they're following any kind of like DISA procedures and stuff like that. Bruce has a lot of experience with that. This will also, this link here, so this one is an explanation of using ROSP, how it works, how you can get to it, what kind of things it checks for. And then this is a list of policies that SharePoint needs in order to function properly. Okay? So just some resources for you. Content and processing. Okay, so I cheated on this one and I put two together again because your servers also process content as well as deliver content. Think that, you know, it's overly simplistic from a troubleshooting perspective. All right, so that's broke now. You're gonna have to fix it. Oh, I'm not gonna.
Should we troubleshoot it?
Yeah, well, I think the root cause was dropping it. So it's overly simplistic, but if you think about what servers do, right? Servers either do something with content, they process it somehow, they deliver it somehow, or they protect it somehow, right? So AD servers, they're all about authorizing access to users to content, right? Database servers are all about delivering content. Application servers, they're usually doing a little bit of both. They're processing the content in some way, and they're delivering content in some way, okay? So, different things that we can look at: services, timer jobs, right? Features, solutions, performance, okay? Those are all things that can affect the way content is processed or content is delivered. How are we going to assess that, all right? We can take a look and make sure that all of our SharePoint services are running, all right? Are we going to start and stop them from services MSC? We open up the services control, right, in Windows Server Manager, and we see all of our services running, and oops, there's a service not running, right? Odds are we don't want to start it from there, right? Odds are we want to start it from SharePoint Central Administration, services on server. Right? Again, back to my illustration with distributed cache. If you go into services MSC, excuse me, and try and stop the service there, that's when you're going to mess stuff up. But if you stop it through SharePoint Central Administration, SharePoint knows how to shut it down correctly. Okay. You can also check your sites and app pools in IIS Manager. All right. Check and make sure all our services are running. Make sure our SQL services are running. All right. So what else do we run into? We run into problems with okay. So features and solutions. Okay. So something that I run into with customization, not my customization, obviously, but is you'll sometimes have feature files, config files, things that don't match. All right, things that aren't kind of set up correctly. So there's a useful tool called WinDiff, all right, which will actually sit there and compare directories and compare configuration files and let you know where the exceptions are or where the differences are between them. Okay. So we've got a project that has kind of been a cleanup project, but we're working with developers who are doing a lot of web services. And each one of these web services has its own web config file. And each one of these web config files has been manually deployed to several different web front ends. Okay? And instead of having one web config file that's being copied across, they've got different web config files across each one. So without something like WinDiff to sit there and tell me where the differences are, I mean, you're sitting there trying to compare them manually. It just doesn't work very well. So I also see problems when your hard drive fills up. So this is a useful tool that will kind of look at all, it's Windows stat, and it will look at your C drive or F drive or whatever, tell you what's using the space, okay, what's taking up the most stuff. And that can be very useful. And then memory, CPU utilization, disk utilization. You can use Performance Monitor to identify bottlenecks, capacity, all that kind of stuff. This link here actually has a really good step-by-step for SharePoint 2013, which monitors, which performance counters you want to set up in order to find information that is relevant. Okay. So, any questions on server to server, client to server, 3 basic categories? All right, for trying to troubleshoot. All right, awesome. So move in here real quickly to some assessment tips. Okay, a couple of things that I've found useful with the Looking at the logs, everybody loves to look at ULS logs, right? They're so engaging, you know. They actually have a pretty good plot. You know, there's a get, which is the beginning. There's a delivery. There's an end. You know, it's a pretty decent climax, but characters are dry. So ULS Viewer, I think everybody's familiar. Well, most people are familiar with ULS Viewer, using it to kind of analyze ULS logs. If not, it's a pretty good tool. Check it out. I don't use it very much myself, just because I'm more of a search person than I am a line-by-line person. All right? Bruce gets on me about this because I tend to put everything in one bucket and let search sort it out, you know. But this is a very good tool for, you know, detailed analysis of the ULS logs. This link here will walk you through some of the configuration settings for diagnostic logging. Okay. One of the things that I like to do is disable all my logging, all right, except for the one thing that I'm troubleshooting, which I'll put on verbose for about 5 minutes and recreate the error, and then I'll shut everything back off again, and it'll give me a very clear picture of exactly what that one service is doing. All right. When you have a clear picture of what that one thing is doing, all the way from the initial request to the error, you can see all the steps that it's taking to get there. All right, and that's what gives us enough information, all right, to make a diagnosis, to form a hypothesis about what's going wrong. And then I also use PowerShell quite a bit to kind of gather the logs. This is spelled collate wrong. Sorry about that. From different servers, and you can use there's a command. It's merge SP log file, all right, that you can run on your SharePoint server, and say merge SP log file. And you give it a correlation ID, and it'll create one log file of everything that's tagged with that correlation ID, all right? And you can actually use that on a single server to kind of say, you know, hey, if you search the ULS logs and you find that GET request, all right, the one that's yours, all right, it has a correlation ID attached to it. So even if you didn't get a correlation error in what you're troubleshooting, if you find that initial request and you find that correlation ID, and then run the PowerShell command and say, hey, search everywhere for this correlation ID, it'll return stuff that's related to that error from everywhere. Okay, so even if you don't see a correlation ID, you can still use that correlation to find out what's been going on. And then SharePoint health reports. Those can be very useful from an informational perspective. I don't really recommend ever trying the auto fix from CA on the SharePoint errors, but you can kind of use that to gather more information and assess what's going on. All right, last bit here is just some more troubleshooting tips, okay? Good idea, bad idea. My daughter and I, we've been watching Animaniacs lately, so that's where I got the images from. But so good idea, keep notes. All right, like I said, I've been using OneNote for quite a bit. OneNote is a great tool for collecting information on this kind of stuff. You know, search for answers, definitely. But try and limit your searches. Don't limit your searches, but verify your information with reputable sites. Okay? If you find something on a blog that says, hey, run this PowerShell script, it's 10 pages long, and you have no idea what it does, you know, send it to your friends first and have them run it, you know, and see if it blows anything up. If it doesn't blow anything up, then, you know,
thank you, Mr. Shyster.
And then, you know, reach out to other people. You know, SharePoint is about sharing. That's why we do events like this. You know, all of us really enjoy talking about the tool and talking about the technology. It's a lot of fun. Most people are willing to help and answer questions, at least. Nobody's going to spend 10 hours, you know, trying to in-depth troubleshoot your system with you, but most people will try and help point you in the right direction.
Where would you post those? What's the best place?
Where would I what?
Post those questions. Where's the best place?
Twitter.
Twitter is good. Also, you know, there's some Yammer groups that have been like kind of gaining steam on stuff like that. Microsoft. So like a lot of my Office 365 stuff, I've been doing the Office 365 IT Pro Yammer group is really a good place to go. Twitter is good, and people will use the hashtag SPHelp to try and get attention. But one of the things about Twitter is that I consider Twitter to be non-permanent. Okay, it's a stream, you know, of information. I dip in every once in a while and look at whatever is in the stream. I can't treat it like email where I read every single one. So you might have to like actually mention a few people on Twitter if you're trying to get their attention they might not see the question. Do you have any other suggestions on places to post?
For questions specifically, I like Stack Exchange.
Stack Exchange is a good one.
Stack
I mean,
Exchange.
even the MSDN forums and stuff like that, I mean, they can be okay.
Yeah.
If you've got a partner account, that helps, you know, so.
TechNet's been pretty reliable. I get answers back from Microsoft, either, I guess they would be consultants or, you know, from around the world. I mean, answers are pretty decent stuff.
Okay. Okay, so another good one. Yeah, I've had mixed success with TechNet, so so I'm glad to hear that. Maybe it's cleaned up a little bit. So. All right, so bad ideas, you know, implement solutions without testing or verifying the information from a reputable source. Bad idea, don't take advice from people named Shyster. And then also bad idea is not communicate issues and resolutions to the other people on your team. Okay, again, if you change something, you know, the last thing that you want to do is change the way the system works and then go on vacation for 3 weeks to a submarine in Antarctica where you're completely unreachable. All right, those are all not really good things to do. So, that about wraps it up. Here's my contact information. Any questions?